Welcome, dear viewers, to a special story that's sure to touch your heart. Today, we explore a tale that begins on a cold Christmas night, where fate brings together two lives in the most unexpected way. Imagine a wealthy woman, burdened by loneliness, stumbling upon a homeless boy on the streets. What happens next will challenge everything you think you know about love, loss, and the true meaning of family. This story isn't just about a chance encounter. It's about the choices we make when faced with the unexpected. What would you do if the very thing you tried to forget suddenly appeared in your life, begging for a second chance? As you listen, consider how far you would go to protect the ones you love, even if it means confronting the ghosts of your past. So, sit back, relax, and let yourself be drawn into a world where the magic of Christmas brings together two souls destined to heal each other. Enjoy, because this story is about to begin. The winter night was unrelenting as snowflakes drifted through the air, swirling in the wind before landing softly on the ground. Eleanor Lawson tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white against the dark leather. Christmas Eve had always been a night of joy and warmth for her, but that was before Richard's death. Now, it was just another painful reminder of everything she had lost. The festive lights strung across the streets, once a sight she adored, now only deepened her sense of loneliness. Driving through the less affluent side of town wasn't part of her usual routine, but tonight, Eleanor found herself drawn there, as if seeking something she couldn't quite name. The car's heater hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the frigid world outside. As she turned a corner, her headlights caught a glimpse of a small figure huddled against a brick wall, barely visible in the dim light. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She slowed the car, squinting through the windshield to get a better look. It was a child, alone, trembling in the cold. Without thinking, she pulled over, the tires crunching on the icy road. She hesitated for a moment, a voice in her head warning her to stay away, to not get involved. But another, stronger voice urged her to act. Opening the car door, the bitter wind hit her immediately, biting at her exposed skin. "Hey, are you all right?" she called out, her voice gentle but firm. The boy flinched at the sound of her voice, curling up tighter as if to make himself invisible. Eleanor approached cautiously, her breath visible in the freezing air. "It's too cold to be out here. Please, let me help you." The boy lifted his head slightly, revealing a pair of wide, fearful eyes. He looked no older than 10, with tangled brown hair and a face smudged with dirt. His clothes were thin, unsuitable for the harsh winter night. Eleanor's heart ached at the sight of him. He reminded her of someone, though she couldn't quite place who. "I don't want any trouble," the boy muttered, his voice barely audible. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. "There's no trouble, sweetheart," Eleanor replied softly. "Just come inside the car. It's warm, and I have some food. You must be hungry." The boy hesitated, eyeing her with suspicion. Life on the streets had taught him to trust no one, but the promise of warmth and food was too much for his empty stomach to resist. After a moment, he gave a small nod, slowly rising to his feet. Eleanor extended her hand, and he took it reluctantly, his fingers cold and stiff. As they sat in the warmth of the car, Eleanor handed him a granola bar from her purse. He tore into it ravenously, his hunger evident in every bite. She watched him with a mix of sadness and relief, wondering how such a young child had ended up in this situation. "What's your name?" she asked gently, trying to break the silence. "Jamie," he mumbled between bites, not looking up. "Jamie, my name is Eleanor," she said, offering a kind smile. "Where are your parents?" Jamie froze for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't have any," he whispered, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor's heart sank. She knew that pain all too well, the feeling of being completely alone in the world. "You're safe now, Jamie," she said, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "I'm going to take care of you." Jamie looked up at her for the first time, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. He wanted to believe her, but trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Eleanor started the car again, her thoughts racing. She had no plan, no idea of what she would do next. All she knew was that she couldn't leave this boy out in the cold. As they drove towards her home, the Grand Lawson estate, Eleanor felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time since Richard's death, she didn't feel completely alone. The road ahead was uncertain, but as she glanced at Jamie, now dozing off in the passenger seat, Eleanor knew that this night would change both their lives forever. And deep down, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As Eleanor's car wound its way up the long, snow-covered driveway, the grand mansion loomed in the distance, its windows glowing warmly in the winter night. Jamie stirred awake in the passenger seat, his eyes widening at the sight before him. The mansion was unlike anything he had ever seen. Massive, with intricate stonework and tall, arched windows. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, a place where someone like him could never belong. Eleanor glanced at him and noticed his awe, mixed with anxiety. "This is my home," she said softly, trying to reassure him. "And it's your home too, at least for now." Jamie didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the imposing structure. He had never imagined finding himself in a place like this, especially not on a night like tonight. As they pulled up to the entrance, Eleanor parked the car and stepped out, motioning for Jamie to follow. The mansion's front doors opened automatically as they approached, revealing a grand foyer with marble floors and a sweeping staircase. The air inside was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Jamie hesitated at the threshold, unsure if he should step inside. "Come on in," Eleanor encouraged gently, sensing his hesitation. "You don't have to be afraid." Jamie took a tentative step forward, his worn-out sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The warmth enveloped him instantly, and for the first time in a long while, he felt safe. Eleanor led him through the foyer and into a cozy sitting room, where a large fireplace crackled with a roaring fire. "Sit down and make yourself comfortable," Eleanor said, gesturing to a plush armchair near the fire. "I'll be right back." Jamie nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. He sat down cautiously, sinking into the soft cushions as he stretched his hands toward the fire. The heat was almost too much after the bitter cold he had endured, but it was a welcome relief. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. A few minutes later, Eleanor returned with a tray of hot cocoa and a plate of freshly baked cookies. The aroma filled the room, making Jamie's stomach growl in anticipation. She set the tray on the coffee table in front of him and handed him a steaming mug. "Here you go," she said with a smile. "This should warm you up." Jamie accepted the mug with both hands, savoring the warmth that seeped through his fingers. He took a cautious sip, and the rich, creamy taste of the cocoa was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was sweet, comforting, and for a moment, it made him forget about the harsh realities of his life. As he drank, Eleanor sat down across from him, studying his face. There was a sadness in his eyes that she recognized all too well, a loneliness that mirrored her own. She wanted to ask him more about his life, about how he had ended up on the streets, but she knew better than to push too hard, too fast. Instead, she began to talk about her own life, sharing stories of Christmases past, of the joyful times she had spent with her late husband, Richard. She spoke of the traditions they had cherished, the decorations they had put up together, and the laughter they had shared. It was a way of filling the silence, of letting Jamie know that he wasn't alone, even if he wasn't ready to open up just yet. As she talked, Jamie listened intently, occasionally nodding or offering a small smile. He still felt out of place, as if he were living someone else's life, but Eleanor's kindness was slowly breaking through his defenses. He could sense that she was different from the others he had met on the streets, those who had either ignored him or looked at him with pity. Eleanor treated him with dignity, as if he was someone who mattered. After a while, Eleanor noticed Jamie's eyelids growing heavy, the warmth and comfort lulling him into a state of drowsiness. She stood up and gently took the empty mug from his hands. "Come on, let's get you to bed," she said softly. Jamie nodded sleepily and followed her as she led him upstairs to a guest bedroom. The room was spacious, with a large bed covered in soft, white linens. It looked like a room out of a magazine, pristine and untouched. Jamie hesitated at the door, unsure if he should really be there. "This is your room for tonight," Eleanor said, sensing his hesitation. "You can stay as long as you need to. There's no rush to leave." Jamie looked at her, searching her face for any sign of insincerity, but all he saw was genuine kindness. He walked into the room, taking in the warmth and comfort that surrounded him. For the first time in months, he felt like he could let his guard down. Eleanor turned to leave but paused at the door. "If you need anything, I'm just down the hall. Don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Jamie murmured, his voice barely audible. Eleanor nodded and left the room, closing the door behind her. As Jamie crawled into the bed, the soft mattress enveloped him in a way that felt foreign, yet comforting. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. But for now, all he could do was close his eyes and allow himself to drift into the first peaceful sleep he had known in a long time. As Eleanor returned to her own room, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of fulfillment. She had taken in a homeless boy on a whim, but it felt like the right thing to do. Little did she know, this decision would unravel secrets and challenges she never expected. And as the snow continued to fall outside, the stage was quietly being set for a journey that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the mansion was bathed in soft, golden light as the winter sun peeked through the tall windows. Jamie awoke in the plush bed, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. It took him a few seconds to remember where he was, a place so different from the cold, hard streets he had grown used to. He lay there for a moment, soaking in the warmth and comfort that seemed almost too good to be true. Downstairs, Eleanor was already up, preparing breakfast in the grand kitchen. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the sweet aroma of pancakes on the griddle. She hummed softly to herself, feeling an unusual sense of contentment. It had been a long time since the house had felt so alive. When Jamie finally mustered the courage to leave the sanctuary of his room, he found his way downstairs, following the delicious smells. He hesitated at the entrance to the kitchen, unsure if he was supposed to be there. Eleanor spotted him and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Jamie," she greeted him, her voice cheerful. "Did you sleep well?" Jamie nodded shyly, his eyes wide as he took in the vast kitchen, with its gleaming countertops and polished appliances. It was more luxurious than anything he had ever seen. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong in such a grand setting. "Come, sit down," Eleanor encouraged, pointing to the breakfast bar where a plate was already set for him. "I hope you like pancakes." Jamie slid onto the stool, staring at the plate piled high with golden pancakes, crispy bacon, and scrambled eggs. It was more food than he had seen in weeks. He hesitated, unsure if it was really meant for him, but the hunger gnawing at his stomach won out. He picked up his fork and began to eat, slowly at first, then with more eagerness as the delicious flavors hit his taste buds. Eleanor watched him, her heart warming at the sight. She couldn't remember the last time she had cooked breakfast for someone else. Richard had always been the one to make breakfast, usually pancakes on Sunday mornings. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the present moment. "So, Jamie," she began gently, "I thought maybe we could spend some time together today. There's a special place in the house I'd like to show you, if you're interested." Jamie looked up from his plate, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What kind of place?" he asked cautiously. "It's a garden," Eleanor replied, a soft smile playing on her lips. "But it's not like any garden you've seen before." After breakfast, Eleanor led Jamie through the mansion to a set of tall, glass doors at the back of the house. She opened them to reveal a breathtaking garden, housed within a glass conservatory. The air inside was warm and humid, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of trickling water from a small fountain in the center. Tropical plants with vibrant leaves and exotic flowers lined the pathways, creating a lush, green paradise in the middle of winter. Jamie's eyes widened in amazement as he stepped inside. It was like stepping into another world, a place where the cold and harshness of the outside didn't exist. He wandered down the path, taking in the sights and smells, his usual wariness momentarily forgotten. "This is my favorite place in the house," Eleanor said, her voice soft and reflective. "Richard and I used to spend a lot of time here. It always brought me peace, and I thought you might like it too." Jamie nodded, his mind racing as he tried to take it all in. He had never seen anything so beautiful, so full of life. It was a sharp contrast to the streets, where everything was grey and lifeless. As they walked through the garden, Eleanor began to talk more about her life with Richard, sharing memories that she hadn't spoken of in years. She told Jamie about how they had built this garden together, a symbol of their love and shared dreams. Jamie listened quietly, feeling a strange connection to her stories. They both knew what it felt like to lose something precious, to have the world shift beneath their feet. By the time they returned to the main house, Jamie felt a little more at ease, the initial tension between them easing as the day went on. Eleanor could see the change in him, how he was starting to trust her, even if just a little. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. That evening, as they sat by the fire in the living room, Eleanor brought out an old photo album. She flipped through the pages, showing Jamie pictures of Richard, of their travels, and of the mansion in its earlier days. Jamie was quiet, but his eyes were attentive, absorbing every detail. "Richard would have liked you," Eleanor said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He always had a soft spot for children, though we never had any of our own. He would have wanted you to feel at home here." Jamie looked up at her, his gaze searching. He wanted to believe her, to trust that this wasn't just a dream that would vanish when he woke up. But the fear of disappointment, of being abandoned again, held him back. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly, the question that had been gnawing at him finally escaping his lips. "Why did you bring me here?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. "Because I've been alone for a long time, Jamie," she said honestly. "And when I saw you out there in the cold, I couldn't just drive away. I felt like maybe we both needed someone." Jamie didn't respond, but something shifted in his expression. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of understanding, of connection. Maybe, just maybe, he could let his guard down, even if only a little. As the fire crackled in the hearth and the snow continued to fall outside, Jamie and Eleanor sat together in a comfortable silence. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt a sense of hope. A fragile, tentative hope that perhaps they had found in each other what they had been searching for all along. The days passed in a quiet rhythm, and Jamie began to settle into the mansion as if it were his own. He spent hours exploring the vast house, wandering through the endless corridors, and discovering rooms filled with treasures from another time. Eleanor allowed him this freedom, watching with a fond smile as he slowly let down his guard. But as Jamie grew more comfortable, Eleanor's curiosity about his past deepened. She knew there was more to his story than he had let on, and the small details he occasionally let slip only fueled her determination to learn the truth. On one particularly cold morning, after Jamie had gone off to play in the garden, Eleanor made a decision. She needed to know more about the boy who had come into her life so unexpectedly. Eleanor began her search discreetly. She started by calling a few local shelters, inquiring if they had any records of a boy matching Jamie's description. Most of them turned up nothing, but one, a small shelter on the outskirts of town, mentioned a boy who had stayed there briefly, disappearing one night without a trace. The information was sparse, but it confirmed Eleanor's suspicions that Jamie had been on the run for a while. The following day, while Jamie was absorbed in a book in the library, Eleanor made another call, this time to an old friend who worked with Child Protective Services. She asked about the boy's background, hoping to find some clue as to his origins. The friend agreed to look into it, but warned Eleanor that the system was often slow, and records could be incomplete or inaccurate. As Eleanor waited for more information, her mind drifted back to her own past. The conversations she'd had with Jamie stirred memories she had long buried. Memories of her own childhood, of a time before Richard, when life had been simpler but fraught with its own challenges. There were things she had never told anyone, not even Richard, and now those memories were coming back with startling clarity. One evening, after dinner, Jamie caught Eleanor staring at a framed photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of her and Richard, taken many years ago on the steps of the mansion. They looked so happy, so full of life, a stark contrast to the emptiness she often felt now. Was he a good man? Jamie asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Eleanor turned to him, a little surprised by the question. "Yes," she replied softly. "He was the best man I've ever known. Kind, generous, and always thinking of others." Jamie nodded, his gaze lingering on the photo. "I never knew my dad," he said after a pause. "My mom used to say he was no good, but I always wondered if she was just angry." Eleanor's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but she knew that he needed to open up on his own terms. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder, offering silent support. "You know, Jamie," she began gently, "sometimes people say things out of anger or pain. It doesn't always mean they're true. But what matters is how we choose to live our lives, no matter what happened in the past." Jamie looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "I guess," he murmured, but there was still a shadow of doubt in his eyes. The next day, Eleanor received a call from her friend at Child Protective Services. The news was both shocking and unsettling. According to the records, Jamie had been taken from his mother years ago due to neglect and placed in the foster system. He had been in and out of various homes, never staying long in any one place, and had eventually run away from his last foster family several months ago. But what struck Eleanor the most was a detail buried deep in the file, a connection that linked Jamie to someone from her own past. The name of Jamie's mother, though different now, matched that of a woman Eleanor had once known, a woman who had been part of her life before Richard, during a time she had tried to forget. It was a connection that made Eleanor's blood run cold. The realization hit her hard. Jamie wasn't just a random boy she had found on the street. There was a deeper, more complicated bond between them, one that could not be ignored. The memories she had been trying to keep at bay now came flooding back, and with them, a sense of dread. Eleanor spent the rest of the day in a haze, unable to focus on anything but the implications of what she had discovered. She knew she had to tell Jamie, but the thought of revealing the truth terrified her. How would he react? Would he hate her for keeping secrets? Would he run away again, leaving her alone once more? That evening, as they sat together in the living room, Jamie noticed that something was off. Eleanor was quieter than usual, her face drawn with worry. He hesitated before speaking, unsure if he should ask what was wrong. "Are you okay?" he finally ventured, his voice small in the quiet room. Eleanor looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of the truth she needed to share. "Jamie, there's something I need to talk to you about," she began, her voice trembling slightly. Jamie's eyes widened in alarm. "What is it?" he asked, fear creeping into his tone. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I've been trying to find out more about your past, about where you came from. And I discovered something I didn't expect. Something that connects us in a way I never imagined." Jamie froze, his mind racing with possibilities. "What do you mean?" he whispered. Eleanor hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Your mother. I knew her, a long time ago, before I met Richard. We were friends once." Jamie stared at her, his heart pounding. He didn't know what to say, what to think. The idea that Eleanor might have known his mother before everything went wrong was almost too much to process. As the silence stretched between them, Eleanor felt a wave of panic. She had opened a door that could never be closed, and now everything was at stake. The life they had begun to build together, the fragile trust they had formed, it could all crumble in an instant. "I'm sorry, Jamie," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Jamie shook his head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't understand. How did you know her?" Eleanor sighed, feeling the weight of her past bearing down on her. "It's a long story, Jamie, and it's not a happy one. But I think you deserve to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be." Jamie looked at her, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "I want to know," he said firmly. "Tell me everything." Eleanor nodded, knowing that the time had come to face the past, no matter how difficult it would be. As the fire crackled softly in the background, she began to tell her story, unraveling the secrets that had been buried for so long. The snow fell heavily outside, muffling the sounds of the world as Eleanor sat in the dimly lit living room, recounting the story of her past. Jamie sat across from her, his small frame dwarfed by the oversized armchair, his face pale as he absorbed each word. The truth, once buried so deeply, was now spilling out, changing everything they thought they knew. "It was many years ago," Eleanor began, her voice soft but steady. "Long before I met Richard. I was young, fresh out of college, and trying to find my way in the world. Your mother, Anna, and I met in New York. We became fast friends, bonded by our shared dreams and the excitement of the city." Eleanor paused, her mind drifting back to those days when everything seemed possible. But life has a way of complicating things. Anna fell in with the wrong crowd. She was always searching for something to fill the void in her life, and she made some bad choices. We drifted apart after that. I tried to help her, but she pushed me away." Jamie's eyes never left Eleanor's face, his expression a mixture of anger, confusion, and a desperate need for answers. "Why didn't you try harder?" he asked, his voice trembling. "If you knew she was in trouble, why didn't you do something?" Eleanor's heart ached at the accusation in his voice. "I was young and naive," she admitted. "I didn't understand how deep her troubles were until it was too late. When I heard that she had a child, I wanted to reach out, but by then she had disappeared. I didn't know where to find her, and honestly, I was afraid of what I might find." Jamie clenched his fists, trying to control the storm of emotions raging inside him. "So you just gave up on her," he said bitterly. "You gave up on us." Eleanor flinched at the harshness of his words, tears welling in her eyes. "I never stopped thinking about her, Jamie," she whispered. "I've lived with that regret for years. When I found you on the street that night, I had no idea you were her son. But when I learned the truth, I knew I couldn't walk away again. I couldn't make the same mistake twice." Jamie stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He began pacing the room, his mind racing. All this time you knew her, and you didn't tell me. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I was afraid," Eleanor confessed. "Afraid that you would hate me, that you would leave. I've lost so much already, Jamie. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." Jamie stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You don't get it, do you? You're all I have left. My mom, my dad, they're gone. And now you're telling me that you were part of her life, that you could have made things different." Eleanor stood and walked over to him, her heart breaking for the boy who had already endured so much. "Jamie, I can't change the past, no matter how much I wish I could. But I'm here now, and I want to help you. I want to be the family you've never had." Jamie shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know if I can trust you," he said, his voice cracking. "How do I know you won't abandon me like everyone else?" Eleanor reached out and gently took his hand, her eyes full of determination. "I promise you, Jamie, I'm not going anywhere. I didn't tell you everything right away because I was scared, but I'm not scared anymore. I want to be here for you, in every way that matters. We can build something new together, something better." Jamie looked at her, searching her face for any sign of dishonesty. All he saw was a woman who had made mistakes but was trying desperately to make amends. He wanted to believe her, to trust that she wouldn't let him down like so many others had. Slowly, he nodded, his resolve softening. "Okay," he whispered, "but I need time." Eleanor pulled him into a hug, holding him close as the weight of the revelation settled between them. "Take all the time you need," she said softly. "I'll be here, every step of the way." As they stood there, the tension that had hung between them began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but they were willing to face it together, one step at a time. The following days were a delicate dance of rebuilding trust. Eleanor made a conscious effort to be more open with Jamie, sharing more about her past, her regrets, and her hopes for the future. Jamie, in turn, began to let his guard down, revealing more about his life on the streets, the hardships he had faced, and the dreams he had long buried. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Jamie finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the night of the revelation. "Do you think my mom is still out there? Do you think she's looking for me?" Eleanor looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of the truth. "I don't know, Jamie," she said honestly. "But if she is, I'm sure she loves you and wants the best for you. And if she's not, well, you still have me. We can build a life together, just the two of us." Jamie nodded, his gaze distant as he stared at the flowers around them. "I want to believe that," he murmured. "I really do." Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "We'll take it one day at a time, Jamie. We'll figure this out together." As the days turned into weeks, Jamie and Eleanor began to find a rhythm in their new life together. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when the shadows of the past threatened to overshadow their present. But with each passing day, they grew closer, building a bond that was stronger than either of them could have imagined. Yet, even as they moved forward, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Jamie's story, more to uncover about the boy who had come into her life so unexpectedly. And she knew that sooner or later, the past would come knocking again, demanding to be faced. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, the sun glinting off the freshly fallen snow, turning the world into a winter wonderland. For the first time in years, the Lawson mansion felt alive with the warmth and spirit of the season. Eleanor had risen early, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time, determined to make this Christmas one that Jamie would never forget. Downstairs, the tree sparkled with twinkling lights and ornaments that had been lovingly placed just the night before. Beneath its branches, an array of carefully wrapped gifts waited, each one chosen with Jamie in mind. The fireplace crackled merrily, filling the room with a comforting glow. Jamie awoke to the sound of soft music drifting through the halls. He stretched in bed, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where he was. A small smile crept onto his face as he listened to the melody, something that had become a familiar part of his new life here. The mansion no longer felt as intimidating as it once had. It was beginning to feel like home. He padded downstairs in his pajamas, the wooden steps creaking softly under his feet. As he reached the bottom, the sight that greeted him made him stop in his tracks. The living room, with its towering tree and flickering fire, looked like a scene from a storybook. Eleanor stood near the tree, arranging a few final presents, and when she saw him, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Good morning, Jamie," she greeted him cheerfully. "Merry Christmas." Jamie's smile widened, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," he replied, his voice still a little shy but filled with genuine happiness. Eleanor beckoned him over, and together they sat by the tree. For a moment, they just admired the decorations, the stillness of the house, and the gentle snow falling outside the windows. It was a peace neither of them had felt in a long time. "Are you ready to open some presents?" Eleanor asked, her eyes twinkling with excitement. Jamie nodded eagerly, his curiosity piqued. He had never experienced a Christmas like this, one filled with so much care and thoughtfulness. As he reached for the first gift, his hands trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the kindness that Eleanor had shown him. The first package revealed a set of warm winter clothes, thick sweaters, soft gloves, and a cozy scarf. The next, a stack of books filled with adventure stories and mysteries, tales of far-off places that he could escape to whenever he wanted. There were also art supplies, a sketchbook, and pencils, each item chosen with love. As he opened the last gift, Jamie's breath caught in his throat. It was a small, polished wooden box with intricate carvings on the lid. He looked up at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly, urging him to open it. Inside, he found a simple silver locket on a delicate chain. He carefully picked it up, noticing the initials engraved on the back, his mother's initials. "I found it among some things from my past," Eleanor explained softly. "I thought you might like to have it. It's a piece of your mom, something to remember her by." Jamie stared at the locket, his emotions swirling. The pain of loss, the ache of unanswered questions, and the new hope that had slowly begun to take root in his heart all mingled together. He clasped the locket tightly in his hand, feeling the cool metal against his skin. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." Eleanor reached over and gently placed a hand on his. "You don't have to say anything, Jamie. Just know that you're not alone. Not anymore." Jamie nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. For so long, he had felt adrift, without a home or family to anchor him. But now, sitting here with Eleanor, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had found both. They spent the rest of the morning together, sharing stories and laughter, the mansion echoing with sounds of joy that had been absent for far too long. Eleanor watched Jamie's face light up with every new discovery, her heart swelling with love and pride. She knew that their journey together was just beginning, that there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that they would face them together. As the day wore on, Eleanor and Jamie took a walk through the garden, the air crisp and fresh, their breath visible in the cold. The garden had become a special place for both of them, a sanctuary where they could escape the world and simply be themselves. "Do you think we'll always stay here?" Jamie asked as they walked along the snow-dusted path, his voice filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. Eleanor looked down at him, her heart full. "I hope so, Jamie," she replied softly. "But no matter where life takes us, we'll always have each other. That's what matters." Jamie smiled up at her, feeling a sense of belonging that he had never known before. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like that a lot." As they made their way back to the mansion, the sky began to darken, the first stars of the evening twinkling above them. Jamie looked up at the vast expanse, feeling small but not alone. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a future, like he could dream again. Back inside, as they settled in front of the fire once more, Eleanor handed Jamie a small plate with a slice of homemade fruitcake. "It's a family recipe," she said with a smile. "Richard's favorite." Jamie took a bite, savoring the rich flavors. It was sweet and comforting, much like the home he had found with Eleanor. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly, the warmth of the flames wrapping around them like a blanket. Eleanor watched Jamie, her heart full of love and gratitude. The boy she had found on that cold Christmas night had brought something back into her life that she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of purpose, of family. She knew that Richard would be proud of her, of the choice she had made to open her heart to Jamie. As the night drew to a close, Jamie and Eleanor exchanged one last look, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer held them captive. They were free to write a new story, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of brighter days ahead. As they headed upstairs to bed, Jamie paused at the bottom of the staircase, looking back at the living room, at the trees still twinkling with lights, at the gifts that had been so thoughtfully chosen. He felt something shift inside him, a sense of peace settling over him like the snow outside. "Good night, Eleanor," he said softly, turning to follow her up the stairs. "Good night, Jamie," Eleanor replied, her voice full of warmth. "Sweet dreams." And as they climbed the stairs together, side by side, the mansion that had once felt so empty was now filled with the quiet contentment of two souls who had found each other at last. For them, Christmas had brought not just gifts, but the greatest gift of all, a new beginning, a new family, and the unshakable belief that, no matter what, they would always have each other. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you like the story. Also watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.